The morning sun drifted lazily over Dixon, Kentucky, painting soft gold streaks across the worn wooden porch of the Combs family home. The town was just waking up, the hum of a tractor in the distance, the faint whistle of a train cutting across the horizon. But inside Chris Combs' kitchen, time felt slower, heavier, thicker than the syrup he poured over his breakfast plate. "Morning." "Babe," his wife Brittany called, her voice half cheerful, half worried. She tried to sound casual, but Chris could sense the concern behind every word. She'd seen him struggle more in recent months, shortness of breath, pain in his knees, the tired look that came even before noon. He smiled, trying to hide the discomfort as he lowered himself into the chair. "Morning, sweetheart. Smells good." It was the same breakfast he'd loved since childhood. Biscuits, gravy, and sausage. Familiar, comforting. Yet every bite came with the quiet sting of guilt that he never spoke aloud. His doctor's voice still echoed in his mind. "Chris, you're at 450 pounds. If you don't make some changes, we're looking at real complications, heart disease, diabetes, sleep apnea. You're on borrowed time, man." He had laughed it off at the appointment, cracking a joke to ease the tension. But that night he couldn't sleep. The truth had sunk deep. Borrowed time. Chris was used to putting others first, especially his sisters, Tammy and Amy Slaton. He'd always been the dependable one, the brother who showed up when something broke, when someone cried, when the world got too heavy. The show 1000 LB Sisters may have started as their journey, but behind the cameras, Chris carried his own story, one of quiet sacrifice and hidden battles. As he watched Brittany pack his lunch for the day, he couldn't help but think how many times she'd done this. Cooking, cleaning, helping him put on his shoes when bending over felt impossible. She never complained, but he could see the fatigue in her eyes too. Love was there, yes, but so was worry. Outside, the sky turned brighter. The day was moving forward, but Chris felt stuck. Every movement reminded him of what he had lost. Agility, confidence, a sense of control. Even simple things, like walking across the yard, took planning. He'd pretend to stop to tie his shoe when really he was catching his breath. He used to be the funny one at gatherings. The one cracking jokes, making everyone laugh. Now sometimes laughter took too much air. He still smiled, but it came with effort. That afternoon, Amy called. Her voice burst through the phone, energetic as always. "Chris, you're coming to Mom's tonight, right?" "We're filming the confessional scene for TLC. They want us all together." He hesitated. "Yeah, I'll be there." "You know I can't miss Mama's cooking, or the drama," Amy laughed. "Tammy's already mad because the crew wants her to talk about her diet again. You better bring that calm big brother energy." Chris chuckled, but the thought made him nervous. He'd seen Tammy struggle, watched her lash out from pain and frustration, and part of him feared he was heading down the same road. That evening, the Slaton Combs family kitchen buzzed with energy. Camera lights, chatter, clattering dishes. Tammy sat in her recliner, arms crossed, a look of defiance plastered across her face. "I'm tired of everyone telling me what I can't eat," she grumbled. Amy stirred the pot on the stove, rolling her eyes. "Girl, we're just trying to help. You ain't gotta take it like an insult." Chris entered quietly, his usual presence calming the storm. All right, let's not start World War III over a plate of mashed potatoes." Everyone laughed. For a moment, the tension eased. But when the cameras rolled, reality settled in again. The producer asked, "Chris, can you tell us what it's like seeing your sisters go through their transformations?" He hesitated. "It's tough, man. You want to help, but you can't live their life for them. I just want us all to be healthy, to be around for our families, you know." What he didn't say, what stayed behind his polite smile, was that he wanted the same for himself. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, Chris stood in front of the bathroom mirror. The house was quiet except for the hum of the air conditioner. He looked at his reflection, the wide frame, the tired eyes, the heavy shoulders. He whispered to himself, "You can't keep living like this." The next morning, he called the clinic. "Hi, I'd like to talk to someone about bariatric surgery." The days that followed were filled with paperwork, appointments, and long talks with Brittany. "Are you sure about this?" she asked one evening as they sat on the porch, the cicadas buzzing in the humid air. Chris nodded. "I have to do this, Britt, for you. For the kids, for me. I'm tired of just existing." Her eyes softened. "I'll be with you every step of the way." The pre-surgery process was grueling. Psychological evaluations, diet changes, and endless tests. Each visit reminded him how much work lay ahead. The doctors emphasized commitment. This isn't magic, Chris. It's a tool. You'll have to change how you live, eat, and think. He nodded, determined but anxious. In the weeks before surgery, TLC cameras followed his progress. The viewers saw the lighthearted moments. Chris joking with his doctor, teasing Amy about protein shakes, but they didn't see the quiet nights filled with fear. The what-ifs. What if something went wrong on the table? What if he failed, like he'd done so many times before? One night, as rain pattered softly against the window, he spoke to Brittany again. "You think I'll still be me after all this?" She smiled and squeezed his hand. "You'll still be you, just lighter, inside and out." On the morning of the surgery, Chris woke before dawn. The world was silent. He looked around his bedroom, the framed photos, the worn work boots by the door, Brittany sleeping peacefully beside him. He whispered, "Let's do this." The hospital smelled of antiseptic and hope. Nurses moved quickly, voices soft but confident. Chris lay on the gurney, heart pounding. The anesthesiologist smiled. "Just breathe deep, Chris. When you wake up, a new chapter begins." He nodded, eyes wet. As the medicine took effect, he thought of his sisters, Tammy still fighting her battles, Amy juggling motherhood and her own health. Maybe, he thought, if I can do this, they'll see it's possible. Darkness. Silence. Then, light. When Chris awoke hours later, the pain hit like a wave, but so did relief. Brittany's face appeared beside him, eyes glistening. "You did it, honey." He smiled weakly. "Guess I'm officially under 450 now." She laughed through her tears. "You're officially my superhero." Recovery was slow, filled with small victories. Standing up unassisted, taking a few steps, sipping broth without nausea. The cameras captured some moments, but not the hardest ones. The nights of discomfort, the hunger pangs that felt more emotional than physical. He would scroll through old photos, cookouts, family trips, and hardly recognize himself. But what hurt most wasn't the body. It was remembering how trapped he'd felt, pretending to be fine. One evening, Amy visited. She brought her usual energy, chatting nonstop as she helped him move from the couch to the recliner. "Dang, Chris, you already look different," she exclaimed. He chuckled. "That's just the swelling going down, girl." Amy grew serious for a moment. "I'm proud of you, really. Maybe seeing you do it will push Tammy too." He smiled. "That's the plan. One Slaton Combs at a time." Weeks turned to months. The scale numbers dropped steadily. 420, 390, 350. Every milestone was met with disbelief and gratitude. His breathing improved, his back hurt less, and he could play with his nieces without gasping for air. The TLC crew filmed his weigh-ins, turning them into small celebrations. Fans online cheered him on, but fame wasn't what he wanted. It was freedom. Still, the mirror told another truth. For every pound lost, new challenges appeared, loose skin that clung like a reminder of what once was. It rubbed painfully when he walked and made him self-conscious during filming. One day, he looked at Brittany and sighed. "I feel better, but sometimes I still don't feel right. Like my body's not caught up with my mind yet," she nodded. "Then we'll keep going. You didn't come this far to stop halfway." And so, Chris set his sights on another goal, skin removal surgery. But first, he had to prove he could maintain his weight loss and pass the medical clearances. It wasn't easy. Between helping Tammy adjust to her own recovery and managing his food truck business, temptations lurked everywhere. Late-night snacks, stress, exhaustion, man. "I didn't think losing weight would mean relearning how to live," he told the TLC cameras in a confessional. "It's not just about what you eat, it's about how you think, every single day." He paused, looking down. "You think once the pounds are gone, everything gets easy. But truth is, the real work starts after." The sound of morning filtered gently through the open window, birds chirping, a lawnmower starting somewhere down the street, the world going about its day. Inside, Chris Combs stood quietly before the mirror. The scale had read 330 pounds that morning, a number he hadn't seen since his 20s. He should have felt victorious. He did feel proud somewhere deep down, but what stared back at him wasn't the man he'd imagined. Loose folds of skin hung from his arms, stomach, and thighs, like shadows of a life he'd shed but could never quite escape. He lifted a handful gently, feeling the weight of it. It wasn't fat, not anymore, but it was a reminder of everything he'd carried for years. Brittany entered, towel in hand. "You okay, babe?" He forced a smile. "Yeah, just getting used to the new me." "Yeah, just getting used to the new me." She set the towel down and stepped closer, wrapping her arms carefully around his waist. "You're doing amazing. You've come so far," he sighed. "Sometimes I wonder if people really understand how hard this is. They see the before and after, but not this part." Brittany nodded. "Then maybe it's time they do." The cameras returned a few weeks later. TLC wanted to document Chris's continued progress, his diet, his family life, his emotional growth. But the tone was different this time. Less about weight loss, more about healing. Chris sat on his front porch, sunlight glinting off the metal armrest of his chair. "When I started, I thought losing the weight would fix everything," he told the producer. "But when it's gone, you realize the hard part's not the food. It's what's left behind." He tapped his chest. "Right here." One afternoon, Chris visited his surgeon, Dr. Smith, for a follow-up appointment. The office was bright and cold, filled with the faint scent of disinfectant. "So, Chris," the doctor said, flipping through his chart, "you've lost over 150 pounds. That's incredible progress," Chris grinned. "Feels good to finally hear that from a doctor." Dr. Smith nodded approvingly, but his tone softened. "How are you handling the loose skin?" Chris hesitated. "Honestly, it's tough. My joints feel better, but sometimes I still feel heavy. I'll bend over or move too fast, and it pulls or chafes. Even clothes don't fit right," the doctor leaned forward. "That's common. When you lose significant weight, especially as fast as you did, the skin doesn't always bounce back. Skin removal surgery is an option, but it's a serious one." Chris listened intently. "What would that look like?" "First," Dr. Smith explained, "we'd need to make sure your weight is stable for at least 6 months. Then we'd do tests to ensure you're healthy enough for the procedure. It's not just cosmetic, and it can improve comfort and mobility. But recovery is long, and there are risks." Chris nodded slowly. "I ain't scared of hard work, I just want to feel like me again." Back home, he told Brittany about the conversation. She was supportive but cautious. "Are you sure you're ready for another surgery so soon?" she asked. He looked at her with quiet determination. "I didn't come this far to stop feeling uncomfortable in my own skin. Literally." She smiled softly. "Then let's do it right. One step at a time." Meanwhile, the family dynamics were shifting again. Tammy was finally turning her life around after her own surgery, and Amy was balancing motherhood with newfound confidence. One evening, the 3 siblings gathered for dinner. No cameras, no producers, just family. Amy passed the salad bowl to Chris. "Look at us, all eating greens and acting healthy," she teased. Tammy laughed, sipping her water. "Never thought I'd see the day we'd all be fighting over lettuce," Chris chuckled. "Hey, long as there's ranch, I'm good." They laughed, but under the humor was something deeper: pride. They had all fought their own demons and survived. After dinner, Tammy turned serious. "You think about that skin surgery yet?" Chris nodded. "Yeah, doctor says I gotta keep my weight steady a few more months." Tammy exhaled. "You deserve it, bro. You worked your butt off, literally." Chris smiled, touched. "Thanks, sis. Feels good to finally be the example instead of the warning." Weeks passed, and Chris stayed committed. He followed his meal plan, walked every morning, and kept his weight stable. But emotionally, some days were harder than others. In one TLC confessional, he admitted, "You know, people say weight loss changes your body. What they don't tell you is it changes how people see you too. Some folks treat me different now, like I'm finally worth their time. But where were they when I was struggling to breathe just walking across the room?" He paused, eyes glistening. "You learn who's real when you lose the weight, and when you lose the excuses." At night, he sometimes sat on the porch alone, thinking about his journey. The crickets sang softly in the background, and the stars looked brighter than they used to. He whispered to himself, "You did it, man. But don't stop now." The next morning, he called Dr. Smith's office. "I'm ready to schedule that skin consultation." The pre-surgery consultation was detailed and intense. The doctor explained everything: incisions, recovery time, scarring. Chris listened carefully, nodding as the nurse measured the excess skin around his abdomen and chest. "It's a lot," he admitted afterward. sitting in the car with Brittany. She took his hand. Yeah, but so was the first surgery. And look where that got you. He smiled faintly. Guess we're going for round 2. The days before surgery felt different this time. There was no fear, just resolve. He'd already proven he could lose the weight. Now he wanted to reclaim the life underneath it. The night before, Brittany helped him pack his hospital bag. You know, she said, you've inspired a lot of people, Chris. Me, your sisters, everyone watching the show. But most of all, you've inspired yourself. He chuckled softly. Yeah, well, it's about time I started believing in me. 2. The surgery day arrived. Early morning, cool air, the same nervous energy as before. As he lay on the hospital bed, prepped for anesthesia, he thought of his journey. From the first doctor's warning to this moment of transformation. Ready? The nurse asked. He smiled. Born ready. Darkness again. Silence. When Chris woke, the pain was sharp but familiar, the kind that told him something was changing. Brittany was there, holding his hand, whispering, You did it again, baby. Tears welled in his eyes. It's finally gone, huh? She nodded. All of it. Recovery was long and exhausting. But this time, every ache felt worth it. The loose folds that had once reminded him of the past were gone. His body felt lighter, freer, and his confidence began to bloom again. On camera weeks later, Chris stood outside his home, sun shining on his face, a quiet pride in his eyes. I used to think strength was about carrying the weight, he said. Now I know it's about letting it go. He paused, glancing toward the horizon. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that transformation isn't about what you lose. It's about what you gain in the process. I gained my life back. Months later, at a family barbecue, Chris was laughing again. Really laughing. He tossed a football with his nephews, helped Amy plate food, and cracked jokes with Tammy like old times. For once, there was no pain, no embarrassment, no limitations, just Chris, living, breathing, smiling as the sun dipped below the trees. Brittany slipped her arm around his waist. Feels different this time, doesn't it? He nodded, eyes glistening. Yeah, for the first time in years, I feel whole. The morning sun crept softly through the blinds, painting stripes of gold across the wooden floor. Chris Combs sat at the edge of his bed, still getting used to how light he felt. Not just physically, though that was true, but inside. The pain that had once defined his mornings was gone. No more aching knees, no more wheezing breaths just from standing. But what surprised him most was how strange that emptiness felt. It was like carrying a backpack for years and suddenly setting it down, freedom, but also disorientation. He touched his side gently, tracing the faint scars that lined his skin. These ain't ugly, he whispered to himself. They're proof. Brittany peeked in through the doorway, holding a cup of coffee. Talking to yourself again? Chris chuckled. Yeah, just giving myself a pep talk. She smiled and handed him the mug. You don't need a pep talk. You're doing amazing, he took a sip, eyes thoughtful. You ever wonder who I'd be if I hadn't done this? Brittany leaned against the wall. Probably the same man, just heavier. He laughed, shaking his head. Nah, I was trapped back then. Couldn't breathe right, couldn't move right. Couldn't live. Now I finally feel like I'm catching up with the life I missed. When the cameras returned for the new season of 1000 LB Sisters, fans were stunned. Chris walked onto the screen looking like a completely different man, leaner, more confident, eyes sharper, and smile brighter. Social media lit up instantly. Chris looks incredible. He's my favorite now. That's real motivation right there. Thousands of comments poured in. People who had followed his story since the beginning sent heartfelt messages about how he'd inspired them to start their own journeys. One night, sitting in the glow of his phone screen, Chris scrolled through messages until one stopped him cold. My dad watched your story and finally booked his surgery consult. You saved his life, man. Chris sat back, phone in hand, eyes wet. I didn't think I'd ever save anyone, he whispered. But with the praise came pressure. Producers wanted to focus more on Chris now, his business, his marriage, his recovery. They pitched spin-off ideas, extra segments, even a possible fitness series. At first, it sounded exciting, but part of him felt uneasy. Fame had never been the goal. Survival was. During one interview, a producer asked, "So, what's next for you, Chris?" He smiled politely. Next? I just want to keep living right. Keeping my health. Keeping my family, the producer laughed. Sure, but I mean... Something big. Maybe another surgery? A new business? Chris's smile faded slightly. I think being alive is big enough. Despite the show's growing attention, Chris tried to keep life simple. He and Brittany started spending weekends outdoors, fishing, hiking, cooking healthy meals together. The world seemed bigger now, more accessible. But there were moments, quiet ones, when the old insecurities crept back. At a grocery store one afternoon, Chris caught someone staring. Not in disgust this time, in disbelief. The man approached. Aren't you that guy from 1000 LB Sisters? Man, you look great. How much you lose? Chris smiled. About 150 pounds, give or take. The man whistled. That's wild, dude. Bet you feel like a new person. Chris laughed softly. Yeah, but sometimes I still feel like the old one, too. They talked for a few minutes before parting, but the words stuck with Chris. No matter how much weight he'd lost, he realized some parts of that old self would always remain. Not physically, but emotionally. The food wasn't just food. It had been comfort, escape, security. Now he was learning to live without that safety net. At home, Brittany noticed his quietness that evening. You okay? She asked, sitting beside him on the couch. He nodded slowly. Yeah, just been thinking. You ever miss the old days? Not the weight, just the routine. She tilted her head. You mean when we'd eat pizza at midnight and watch TV till we passed out? He smiled. Yeah, that. It wasn't healthy, but it was easy. Brittany reached for his hand. Easy doesn't always mean good, babe. Look at us now. We walk together. We laugh more. We live. He squeezed her hand gently. Yeah, we do. That night, Chris couldn't sleep. He went outside and sat under the porch light, watching the moths flicker around the bulb. He opened his phone and started recording a short video message for his fans. Something raw. Something real. Hey, y'all. It's Chris. I just wanted to say something that's been on my mind lately. People keep asking how I did it, how I lost the weight, how I found the strength. But the truth is, I didn't find it all at once. It came little by little, day by day. And if you're out there struggling, I just want you to know, it's okay to start small. It's okay to fail. What matters is that you keep showing up, because that's how you win. He paused, looking down for a second before adding softly, I ain't perfect. I still fight my demons, but I promise you, life's worth the fight. He posted it, not expecting much. By morning, it had over 100,000 views. Weeks later, Chris was invited to a local health event in Kentucky. The organizers wanted him to speak, not as a reality star, but as a survivor. He stood backstage nervously, tugging at his shirt. Brittany squeezed his shoulder. You've got this. Just tell your truth. He nodded, took a deep breath, and stepped out under the bright lights. The audience, dozens of people, many overweight or struggling with self-esteem, looked up at him expectantly. Chris started slowly. I used to hide from mirrors. I used to hide from cameras, from crowds, even from myself. But one day, I realized I was tired of hiding. He shared his story, the surgery, the pain, the triumph, the skin, the scars. And then he said something that made the room fall silent. Losing weight didn't save my life. Loving myself enough to try did. When he finished, the applause was thunderous. People stood up, clapping through tears. Afterward, a woman approached him, trembling slightly. My son's been scared to get help. Can I tell him your story? Chris smiled warmly. Tell him mine. Then tell him his own can be even better. As the months went on, Chris began using social media to share more motivational content, not for fame, but to keep others from feeling as alone as he once did. He posted videos of morning walks, cooking healthy meals, and simple reflections about gratitude and persistence. People think transformation is about losing, he said in one clip. But it's also about learning. Learning who you are when you strip away all the excuses. He gained thousands of followers. Not just fans of the show, but people genuinely moved by his honesty. But with every new message of support came another challenge, expectation. Some fans wanted him to be perfect, a flawless example of discipline and health. Others scrutinized every detail. Looks like he gained weight again. Hope he's not slipping. Chris read those comments sometimes, even though he knew he shouldn't. They stung. Because no one saw the full story. The late nights, the cravings, the exhaustion, the fear of backsliding. He wasn't a superhero. He was human. One night, frustrated, he said to Brittany, "Sometimes I feel like I traded one pressure for another. Used to be scared of dying fat. Now I'm scared of disappointing people." She looked at him gently. "You can't live for their approval, Chris. You gotta live for you." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, guess I'm still learning that." During the next season's filming, TLC captured a different side of him. Not the dramatic surgeries or weigh-ins, but the quiet persistence that defined real change. A scene showed Chris waking up before sunrise, tying his shoes and walking along a foggy road. His voiceover said, "Every day's a choice. Some days I win, some days I don't. But every step I take is one away from the man I used to be." It was simple, real, and it resonated deeply with viewers. By mid-season, Chris had become the emotional anchor of the show, the steady, grounded presence balancing Tammy's chaos and Amy's motherhood journey. Fans adored his humility. Critics praised his transformation. And for the first time, Chris felt like he'd found his place, not just on TV, but in his own skin. Still, he kept his goals humble. When asked about his next dream, he said, "Honestly, I just want to keep feeling good. Maybe open that food truck I've been talking about. Serve healthy versions of Southern food. Show people you can eat good and live good." Brittany loved the idea. "You could call it Combs Comfort Kitchen," she joked. He laughed. "Yeah, healthy comfort food. Who'd have thought?" But deep down, he knew this chapter wasn't the end, just another beginning. The weight was gone. The scars were healed. But the real transformation was happening in his mind. The belief that he deserved happiness, health, and peace. And that belief slowly but surely began to spread to everyone around him. Tammy smiled more. Amy cooked lighter. Even the fans seemed inspired to live differently. Chris had unknowingly become the heartbeat of a show that started as a spectacle and evolved into something deeply human. One evening, as the sun set over Kentucky's quiet hills, Chris and Brittany sat on the porch again, the same spot where so many of their struggles had begun. Brittany rested her head on his shoulder. "You realize how far you've come?" Chris nodded. "Yeah, but I ain't done yet," she smiled. "You think you'll ever be?" He looked out at the fading light. "I hope not. Because the moment I stop growing, that's when I start dying." They sat there in silence, the cicadas humming, the stars beginning to appear one by one. Chris breathed in deeply, the cool night air filling lungs that once struggled for every breath. He whispered, "This right here. This is what living feels like." The morning light crept through the kitchen blinds of Chris Combs' Kentucky home, spilling soft gold across the table where half-empty coffee cups sat beside yesterday's mail. The world outside was already awake, birds calling, a distant lawnmower humming. But inside, the air felt still, as if the day were waiting for him to decide how it would begin. Chris stood before the refrigerator, absent-mindedly tracing the edges of an old photo taped to the door. It showed him years ago, heavier, smiling wide, a plate of barbecue ribs in one hand, Brittany's arm looped around his shoulder. That was a different man, one who had laughed louder, eaten without guilt, and hidden behind humor every time the world stared too long. Now, the reflection staring back from the stainless steel wasn't that man anymore, but it wasn't someone he fully recognized either. "Who am I now?" he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. The question had started to haunt him ever since the cameras left. TLC had wrapped another season of 1000 LB Sisters, and for the first time in months, there were no producers texting about filming schedules, no microphones clipped to his collar, no lights following him from dawn to dusk. For a man who once claimed he didn't care for the spotlight, the sudden silence felt lonely. He poured himself another cup of coffee, staring into the black surface as if it might give him answers. He'd lost the weight, over 150 pounds gone forever. But the weight that lingered was something else. The pressure to stay that man, to prove that his transformation wasn't temporary, to live up to the version of himself that fans saw on television. Outside, Brittany called for him to come out to the porch. "You're gonna miss this sunrise," she said with a soft smile. "You always used to love mornings like this." Chris smiled back, the kind of tired smile that carried both love and unspoken fatigue. He joined her, stepping into the cool air. The horizon was streaked with orange and lavender, and the scent of dew wrapped around the small town still half asleep. "Feels good out here," he murmured, sinking into the creaky porch chair beside her. "For a man who didn't want to wake up 5 minutes ago, you sure sound poetic," Brittany teased. He chuckled. "Guess losing weight gave me room for emotions, too." They both laughed, but under the humor lay something heavier, the awareness that their life, while stable, was still full of delicate balance. Money came in waves depending on filming, sponsorships, and appearances. Some months felt steady, others uncertain. Chris had been saving, trying to plan ahead, but reality TV didn't come with a pension plan, and the food truck dream, the one that once filled him with fire, had stalled. Business was slow, equipment expensive, and the town small. Some nights he'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling fan spinning lazily overhead, wondering if he had traded one struggle for another. Still, he refused to let regret take root. Every morning he reminded himself of the man he used to be, gasping for breath walking up steps, afraid of mirrors, afraid of hospitals. That man had nearly died from giving up on himself. Chris wasn't about to go back there, giving up on himself. Chris wasn't about to go back there. Weeks later, the cameras returned to Kentucky to film a short special, a follow-up on the Slaton siblings' journeys. Amy was cheerful, chasing her boys around the yard. Tammy was thriving under Derek's care and enjoying small freedoms she'd once thought impossible. But when they turned the lens toward Chris, the energy shifted. He wasn't the comic relief or the sidekick anymore. He was a man standing in the middle of a crossroads. "So, Chris," the producer asked, "how does it feel, being on the other side of all this? The surgeries, the fame, the new life?" Chris looked at the lens, then at the horizon behind it. "It feels strange," he said slowly. "Like I worked all my life to climb a mountain, and when I finally got to the top, I realized there's another one behind it." The crew fell silent for a moment. It was the kind of honesty that didn't need editing, raw, unpolished, real. Later that night, after the crew packed up, Chris sat outside alone. The Kentucky stars stretched endlessly overhead, quiet, unjudging. He thought about his sister Tammy, about how far she'd come from her lowest days. He thought about Amy's laughter echoing from her new home. Pride warmed his chest, but so did fear. They were all fighting their battles, and he knew recovery wasn't a straight road. One slip, emotional, mental, or physical, could send everything crashing. The phone buzzed in his pocket. A message from Tammy. "Proud of you today, bro. Don't let that brain of yours talk trash." "You're doing great," he smiled softly. Tammy, the sister who once resisted every ounce of help, now sent messages of encouragement. Life had a funny way of flipping the script. A few weeks passed. Chris began volunteering at a local support group for people considering bariatric surgery. The meetings were held in a small community hall, the same kind of space where church gatherings and bake sales took place. Folding chairs, lukewarm coffee, and a circle of strangers all bound by a common fear: change. He stood before them one evening, wearing a simple plaid shirt and jeans. His voice, usually boisterous, was calm. "Look," he began, "I'm not going to stand here and pretend it's easy. Surgery helps, sure, but it doesn't fix the part of you that reaches for comfort when you're hurt. That's the work you got to keep doing, every day." A woman in the front row raised her hand. "How do you deal with the people who doubt you? The ones who think you'll fail?" Chris smiled. "You let your results do the talking. But mostly, you learn not to live for their applause. Because if you do, you'll live and die by it." When the session ended, a young man approached him. "You made it sound real, man. Not just TV stuff." Chris nodded, patting the guy's shoulder. "Because it is real. The cameras leave, but life doesn't." Driving home that night, Chris felt something stirring, a quiet purpose that had nothing to do with ratings or fame. Maybe his real calling wasn't to entertain, but to help. Maybe that was why he'd gone through everything, to show others it could be done. But fame has long shadows. One evening, while grocery shopping, a woman stopped him near the frozen foods aisle. "Oh my God, you're Chris from 1000 LB Sisters. Can I get a photo?" He smiled politely. "Sure thing, ma'am." Afterward, she leaned in and whispered, "You look thinner on TV." Chris froze for a split second. The comment meant as small talk. Maybe even innocent, but it cut deeper than she knew. That's the thing about recovery. People only see the before and after, never the in-between. He got home that night quieter than usual. Brittany noticed immediately. "Rough day?" she asked gently. He hesitated. "Sometimes it feels like people don't see me anymore. Just the story. Just the transformation. Like I'm stuck being the weight loss guy forever." She took his hand. "Then remind them you're more than that." It was simple advice, but it stuck with him. Over the next few weeks, Chris started doing more outside the world of 1000 LB Sisters, speaking engagements, cooking demos for healthy Southern food, even starting a small YouTube channel with Brittany where they shared recipes and talked openly about mental health. It wasn't flashy, but it was theirs. And for the first time in a long while, Chris felt like he was building something lasting. Still, one storm cloud lingered: the skin removal surgery. The doctors had warned him that a second operation would be expensive, maybe not covered by insurance. Every time he looked in the mirror, the loose folds reminded him of the weight he'd carried, both physical and emotional. At night, he'd trace the scars and think, how much of me do I have to cut away before I finally feel whole? He talked it over with Brittany one evening while folding laundry. "I know it's not medically required," he said, "but it's something I need for myself. Not to look perfect, just to feel finished." Brittany looked at him with quiet understanding. "Then we'll figure it out, together." They started researching costs, setting aside money, even talking to TLC about possibly documenting the journey. Chris didn't want it for the fame. He wanted it for closure, for the man who had fought too hard to live half-free. By early spring, Chris began training again. Light weights, morning walks, clean eating. He wasn't chasing numbers on a scale anymore. He was chasing peace. Every sunrise became a ritual. Coffee, prayer, gratitude. Sometimes he'd drive out to the hills overlooking town, watching the fog lift as the world woke up. In those moments, the noise faded, the fame, the worry, the expectations. All that remained was a man who had fought his own body, his own mind, and somehow was still standing. He often thought of something his grandmother used to say: "You can't heal what you keep hating." For years, he had hated his reflection, his habits, his failures. But somewhere between the surgeries, the tears, and the laughter, he'd learned that healing wasn't about erasing who you were. It was about learning to love that person enough to want better, and that, perhaps, was the real miracle, not the weight lost, but the weight released. As the months rolled by, the Slaton siblings found new rhythms. Amy was planning a new adventure for her kids. Tammy was getting stronger every week. And Chris, once the quiet observer and had become their anchor, the steady voice reminding them that they had already overcome more than most ever would. One evening, while sitting outside watching the sunset, he said to Brittany, "You know, I used to think my story ended with surgery, but I think it's just beginning." She smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "Then let's see where it goes." The cicadas hummed. The sky burned orange, and for the first time in years, Chris Combs didn't feel like a man running from his past. He felt like a man walking toward his future, one steady, peaceful step at a time. The first light of dawn broke over Kentucky like a slow-burning promise, pale gold spilling through the mist, painting the small town in a glow that made everything feel suspended between memory and possibility. Chris Combs stood at his window, coffee in hand, watching the morning arrive. The steam curled from the cup like breath from a soul reborn. It had been nearly 2 years since his surgery. 2 years since he'd made the hardest decision of his life: to stop dying and start living. The journey since had been messy, beautiful, and painfully real. The world saw highlights, before and after photos, quick updates on 1000 LB Sisters, funny moments from social media. But what they didn't see were the quiet mornings like this, where Chris stared into the distance and tried to understand how far he'd come, and how far he still wanted to go. He wasn't chasing fame. He wasn't chasing perfection. He was chasing peace. Later that morning, he joined Brittany in the kitchen. The smell of turkey bacon sizzled in the air, mingling with the soft country music playing from the radio. "You've been up since 5, she said, smiling knowingly. "Couldn't sleep," Chris admitted. "Too many thoughts knocking around up there. Good ones, I hope?" He shrugged with that half grin of his. "Mostly just thinking about what's next. About the surgery. And the future." She set the spatula down and leaned against the counter. "You know, whatever you decide, I'm behind you. Always have been." That was the thing about Brittany. She never pushed, never judged. She just believed. even when Chris didn't. He looked at her then, really looked, at the woman who'd held his hand through fear, stood beside him through recovery, and laughed with him through every awkward, humbling moment of transformation. "You saved me," he said quietly. She smiled. "No, babe. You saved yourself. I just reminded you what was worth saving." As spring deepened into summer, life found its rhythm again. Chris's volunteer work at the support group had turned into something bigger. Invitations from hospitals, wellness events, and even schools asking him to share his story. He was hesitant at first. Public speaking wasn't exactly his comfort zone. But every time he stood before a crowd, something powerful happened. He'd tell them about the nights he couldn't breathe lying flat on his back. About the shame that came from pretending to be happy. About the day he realized his nieces and nephews deserved an uncle who'd live long enough to see them grow up. And every time, someone in the crowd cried. Not out of pity, but out of recognition. Because pain, in its quiet way, is universal. One evening after a talk, a man approached him, large frame, trembling hands, voice cracking as he spoke. "Chris, you don't know me, but your story, it made me cancel the pizza I ordered tonight. That might sound small, but for me, that's a start." Chris put a hand on his shoulder. "Brother, that's not small. That's the first brick in a brand new house. That's not small. That's the first brick in a brand new house." Moments like that reminded him why he kept telling his story. It wasn't about television. It was about connection. Every scar, every stumble, every tear, it all meant something if it helped someone else climb their own mountain. But behind the scenes, the new season of 1000 LB Sisters loomed on the horizon. Producers called, eager for updates. "Fans love your transformation, Chris. How do we top it this time?" He chuckled softly. "You don't top life. You live it." They wanted drama, of course, and the surgery, the tension, the next big headline. But Chris was done performing his pain for ratings. If they filmed again, it would be on his terms. When he told Brittany, she nodded proudly. "You're not just a cast member anymore. You're a man who knows his worth." Still, he didn't want to turn his back on the show entirely. It had given him a platform, a voice that reached people who needed it. So he struck a balance. Honest storytelling without exploitation. Hope without spectacle. Around that time, Tammy visited for a long weekend. She was glowing, healthier, calmer, her eyes brighter than they'd been in years. "Look at you, Miss Independent," Chris teased, hugging her tightly. She grinned. "I could say the same, old man." They spent the afternoon reminiscing about filming days, the chaos, the laughter, the heartbreak. But beneath the nostalgia was a shared understanding. They'd survived things most people couldn't imagine. "I used to hate watching our old episodes," Tammy admitted, her tone soft. "All I saw was my pain. But now, I see people trying. Broken, but trying." "That makes me proud," Chris nodded slowly. "We've come a long way, sis, and we ain't done yet." They sat side by side as the sun dipped behind the trees, two souls bound by blood, struggle, and redemption. No cameras, no scripts. Just family. Months later, the day of Chris's second surgery arrived. The hospital air smelled of antiseptic and quiet fear. Brittany squeezed his hand as they waited for the nurse. "You ready?" she asked. "As I'll ever be," he said with a nervous laugh. "Feels like the last chapter of a long, long book." "Maybe it's just the beginning of a new one." He smiled at that. "Yeah, maybe." When the anesthesia mask came down, he closed his eyes. Not with dread, but with gratitude. Gratitude for the journey that had broken him open and rebuilt him stronger. The surgery went well. The healing was long and slow, weeks of soreness, physical therapy, and emotional waves. But every morning, when Chris looked in the mirror, he saw a man finally at peace with his reflection. Not perfect. Not flawless. Just whole. Brittany stood behind him one morning, wrapping her arms around his waist. "Look at you," she whispered. "You did it." He turned, smiling. "We did it." As the year came to an end, Chris returned to the same porch where his story had begun. The sky stretched wide and pink above Kentucky, and the world felt quiet, not empty, but full in a way that words couldn't quite describe. He pulled out a notebook, something he'd been writing in lately, not for a show, not for fans, but for himself. He wrote, "I used to think weight loss was about numbers, but it's about forgiveness. Forgiving your body for breaking. forgiving your mind for quitting, and forgiving yourself for believing you didn't deserve more. I did deserve more. We all do. He paused, looked at the sky, and smiled. That easy, content smile of a man who had finally made peace with both his past and his future. Inside, the phone buzzed. A message from Amy lit up the screen. Family dinner Sunday. Don't be late, or I'm eating your portion first. Chris laughed out loud. Wouldn't be a Slaton dinner if I didn't show up late, he muttered. He slipped the phone into his pocket and sat back, watching the fireflies blink into the dusk. Life wasn't perfect, and it never would be, but it was his. And for the first time in decades, that was enough. In the story of 1000 LB sisters, every sibling carried their own battle and their own redemption. Amy found strength in motherhood. Tammy discovered love beyond limits. And Chris, he found himself not in fame, not in the mirror, but in the quiet moments when no one was watching. Because real transformation doesn't happen under lights or applause. It happens in the stillness, when you finally choose to love the person you once thought was unlovable. The screen would fade to black. Just the sound of Kentucky crickets in the night. And one last line written in white letters across the silence. The journey doesn't end when the weight is gone. It begins when you start living free. Living free.